You are about to enter a place where the shadows never dissipate, where the silence is heavier than the night itself. The village of Kurohama, lost in time, hides a secret that only the bravest dare to unveil. They say that in the darkness, the vengeful spirit of Asuka waits for those who venture too far, and that once you hear the 3 knocks, there is no escape. You are in echoes of the night, and what you will hear today is not just a story, it's a warning. Get ready, and before everything begins, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Whatever happens, do not ignore the 3 knocks. The night enveloped the ancient village of Kurohama like a veil of dense shadows, where the wind whispered forgotten secrets among the dead cherry trees. There were no pink petals dancing to the rhythm of the breeze, only twisted branches, like skeletal fingers pointing toward a starless sky. They say that centuries ago, a vengeful spirit known as the Onryō of Uemura haunted these lands. It is said that she was a young woman named Asuka, unjustly accused of witchcraft and sacrificed in a cruel ritual to appease the gods of harvest. Her last scream echoed through the forest, and since then, no field has ever bloomed again. Hiroshi, a skeptical journalist, arrived at the village with his camera and a notebook. He had heard rumors of apparitions and inexplicable events, but he was there to expose the local superstitions, or so he thought. His desire was simple, a sensationalist article that would catapult him to fame. The inn where he stayed was an old mansion, with creaking wood and paper lanterns casting unsettling shadows on the walls. The owner, an old woman with a wrinkled face and a lost gaze, warned him, "If you hear 3 knocks on the door at midnight, don't open it." Hiroshi just smiled, dismissing it as a cheap strategy to fuel fear. The first night passed in an uncomfortable silence. The only sound was the creaking of the wood, as if the house was breathing. On the second night, he heard dragging footsteps in the hallway, followed by a faint whisper, or was it the wind? But it was on the third night when everything changed. At precisely midnight, 3 sharp knocks echoed on his bedroom door. Hiroshi hesitated. His heart raced, but his rational mind insisted, "It's just someone playing a prank." He opened the door. The hallway was empty, or almost. A female figure, dressed in a white kimono stained with red, stood at the far end, her face hidden behind long black hair. Her feet did not touch the ground. Hiroshi tried to speak, but his voice died in his throat. The woman slowly lifted her head, revealing a face distorted by hatred and pain. Her eyes were black holes, and her mouth, open in a silent scream, seemed like an endless abyss. He stepped back, locking the door, but the knocks continued. 1, 2, 3, always in groups of 3, as if mocking him. Since that night, Hiroshi realized he was no longer alone. Whispers echoed in the corners of his room. Objects moved on their own, and his reflection in the mirror seemed to have a life of its own, lagging slightly behind his movements. Desperate, he went to search for the old hostess, but he found her dead in her room, her eyes wide open and her mouth agape, as if she had seen something terrifying. Hung on the wall next to her, there was an ancient scroll with a warning. He who sees the Onryō will never escape. Hiroshi fled the village that night, but the spirit followed him. He began seeing shadows lurking in his house, hearing the same 3 knocks on the door every night. As time passed, Hiroshi lost his job, his friends, and gradually his own sanity. His final diary entry, found next to his lifeless body, read, "She never stops. 3 knocks. Always 3 knocks. She is here." And they say, those who read his words, that on the 3rd night after learning the story, they too hear 1, 2, 3 knocks on the door of their own room. The village of Kurohama, with its heavy macabre atmosphere, seemed trapped in an eternal cycle of suffering. The inhabitants, though few, were immersed in an unsettling silence, as if they feared the return of the spirit that haunted them. No one dared speak of the Onryō, and any mention of Asuka's name was enough to make expressions harden in terror. Even after fleeing the village, Hiroshi felt increasingly consumed by the shadow of that story. Days passed, but the mental and psychological torment he experienced did not lessen. He began to see Asuka in his nights, always in the corner of his room, her face distorted by pain, her empty eyes staring at him. She followed him wherever he went, but his true torment began to reveal itself in his dreams. One night, Hiroshi awoke to the sound of soft footsteps. But it wasn't the sound of a real person. It was a sound that came from deep within his mind, as if Asuka's spirit were trying to communicate. He stood up, his breath ragged, and walked to the mirror. There, his reflection was not the same. His own eyes were dark, and his face began to distort, as if he were being consumed by the anger and pain of Asuka. The days began to drag on in an endless nightmare. Hiroshi tried to seek help, but it seemed everyone around him was taken by a strange apathy. When he approached others to tell his story, his words seemed to fail, as if someone or something was erasing his voice. Asuka's spirit surrounded him, and her power seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. One hot afternoon, Hiroshi went to a local library, hoping to uncover more about the ritual that had cursed the village. There, he found an old book about spirits that haunted Japan, and as he flipped through the pages, he found a fragment of text detailing Asuka's curse. When a spirit like the Onryō is awakened, it seeks out those who caused it or those who seek to unveil its story. They feed on despair, dragging their victims to a place between the world of the living and the dead. Asuka's spirit will never rest until her vengeance is fulfilled. With this revelation, Hiroshi felt a chill down his spine. He understood then that Asuka's curse was not just a local ghost story, but an inevitable fate for anyone who dared uncover Kurohama's dark past. That very night, as he tried to sleep, the weight of his head began to increase. He felt as though something was pressing on his chest, something invisible and insidious. When he opened his eyes, Asuka was lying beside him, her black hair like ink spread across the pillow, and her eyes, black holes, stared at him with terrifying intensity. "You will not escape," she whispered, her voice like the distant echo of an abyss. Hiroshi tried to scream, but his voice failed him again. His body was paralyzed, immobilized by the presence of the spirit. He was being consumed by the same pain and vengeance that Asuka had endured. Every breath he took seemed to lighten him, as if he were being dragged into a parallel dimension. As the days passed, Hiroshi began to realize that his memories were fading. The past became blurry, as if the very timeline was being erased, and the only anchor was Asuka's incessant torment. He no longer knew if he was alive or dead, or if he was still trapped between the two worlds. On a moonless dawn, Hiroshi once again tried to seek answers, going to the ancient temple of the village where, according to legend, Asuka had been sacrificed. The place was in ruins, but he felt an irresistible urge to enter. Inside the temple, a figure standing in the darkness watched him. It was Asuka, but this time her appearance was even more deformed, a mix of rage and suffering overflowing from her figure. You try to understand. Now it is too late. With a sudden movement, she advanced, and Hiroshi felt as if his soul were being torn from his body. The sound of 3 knocks echoed in his mind, repeatedly, until he could no longer discern where his body ended and Asuka's spirit began. He was becoming part of her vengeance, unable to escape. The following weeks were a whirlwind of strange events. Those who entered Hiroshi's house felt the presence of something strange and oppressive. When a bolder visitor opened Hiroshi's notebook, they found his last words, written in trembling handwriting. "She consumed me. Now I am her." The news of Hiroshi's death spread quickly, but no one knew for sure how he had died. Some said he had gone mad. Others believed he had been dragged into the darkness. But everyone agreed on one thing. No one dared enter his house. The neighbors began reporting sounds of 3 knocks during the night. And on one of those nights, a figure dressed in a white kimono, stained with red, was seen approaching the door of a nearby house. Those who saw the figure, one by one, disappeared without a trace. The village of Kurohama, which was already marked by Asuka's presence, was now immersed in the curse of the Onryō. Those who passed by, hearing the sound of 3 knocks, knew that death was inevitable. Some tried to escape, but Asuka's shadow always found them, in their nightmares or in their homes, waiting for the right moment to take another soul. They say that the village of Kurohama was completely forgotten by the world, and that no one dare speak of it. However, on dark and silent nights, those who venture near the area swear they hear the sound of 3 knocks echoing in the darkness. And when someone, out of curiosity, approaches where the village once stood, they find an ancient inscription on a rock that reads, "Whoever hears the 3 knocks will never escape. The Onryō is always waiting." And so, the legend of Asuka continues, a story that reinvents itself every night, like death itself. The story of Asuka, the vengeful Onryō, remained hidden in the shadows of Kurohama, like a cursed secret that should never be revealed. However, over time, Asuka's spirit spread beyond the boundaries of the village, affecting all those who dared speak her name or enter the territory she inhabited. Those who heard the three knocks, like Hiroshi, were soon consumed by the curse, and their lives transformed into an endless nightmare. Each time the spirit claimed a new soul, Asuka's presence grew stronger, more tangible. Her dark energy spread like a plague, infiltrating the homes and minds of her victims. They could not escape what she represented, and fear began to dominate the hearts of those nearby. Many tried to flee, but no one succeeded. With each escape attempt, the darkness followed like an unrelenting shadow, relentless, with no intention of letting them be at peace. But it was on a silent night, when a freezing breeze cut through the air and the cherry tree branches moved like bony fingers, that a new soul was lost. A young man named Taro, a curious student who had heard stories about the village, decided to investigate the curse on his own. The news of Hiroshi's fate had already spread, and Taro believed he could find a rational explanation for the events. What he didn't know was that his curiosity would lead him to an even darker destiny. Upon arriving at the village, Taro noticed the atmosphere was heavy, almost oppressive. The desolate landscape and the winds whispering through the trees gave the sensation that the village was alive, but in a way that could not be understood. Without hesitation, he made his way to the old temple where the legend of Asuka had taken form. Upon entering, the air felt thicker, and the silence was almost deafening. There, he found Hiroshi's journal, whose last words were a clear warning. "She consumed me. Now I am her." Taro was determined to understand what had happened to Hiroshi, believing that he could escape the fatal destiny of those touched by the curse. However, with every page he turned, Asuka's story became more vivid and terrifying. He began to feel a presence, as if someone were watching him from the shadows. It was then that he heard, for the first time, the three knocks. They sounded soft in the distance of the temple, like an echo, but Taro knew exactly what they meant. In panic, he ran toward the door, but it was locked. The knocks continued persistent, as if Asuka's spirit were drawing closer. Taro tried to call for help, but his voice seemed swallowed by the darkness. The shadow of a young woman in a white kimono stained with red slowly appeared in the corner of the temple, her empty eyes fixed on him. She advanced, and Taro felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Terror paralyzed him, and the sound of the three knocks intensified, becoming deafening. The moment Asuka touched his arm, Taro felt as if his life were slowly fading away. Time seemed to stop, and he was dragged into a dimension between the living and the dead, where all that remained was the deep void and constant pain. Just like Hiroshi, he was absorbed by Asuka's vengeance. He couldn't escape, and his soul was consumed by the same dark force that had destroyed so many before him. With Taro's disappearance, more and more accounts began to emerge of people passing near the village's path. They would hear the knocks and then vanish. Those who dared approach the ancient village of Kurohama were found with their eyes wide open, mouths agape in a terror-stricken expression, but with no signs of life. For those who found them, the fate seemed inevitable, and all roads led to the same conclusion: death at the hands of Asuka. However, as more and more souls were claimed, the story of the village was forgotten. Records disappeared from libraries, and the location of Kurohama was erased from maps. Still, Asuka's curse never completely vanished. The knocks echoed from afar, a reminder that whoever once heard those knocks would never be free from the shadow that followed them. A few years later, a new investigator arrived in the region, trying to discover what had happened to Kurohama. His name was Kaido, and he was determined to write the greatest mystery book ever published. He listened to the legends and rumors, but still didn't believe in the power of the curse. Kaido approached what was once the village, now a field of ruins. He felt a chill in the air, but he was obsessed with finding logical explanations. He arrived at the ruins of the temple, and like Taro before him, he couldn't resist the temptation to explore further. As he entered, a strange sensation overtook him, and he felt as if he were being watched. The three knocks sounded again, more distant, yet closer with each passing moment. Kaido tried to ignore them, thinking they were mere illusions created by his mind. But when he looked into the broken mirror in the temple, he saw Asuka's reflection. Her distorted face and empty eyes seemed to be watching him with a cruel smile. As he tried to flee, the temple's exit disappeared. Time bent, and Kaido realized he was trapped within Asuka's curse. There was no way out. He was consumed, his soul absorbed by the same darkness that had claimed so many before him. The last remnant of his presence were found only in the form of a crumpled note in his pocket. There is no escape. The knocks never cease. The Onryō is always waiting. The village of Kurohama, once vibrant, continued to exist in a state of eternal torment, where no one dared enter, and the sound of the 3 knocks was the only sign that Asuka's vengeance was still in action. Those who heard the knocks knew their end was near, and the lost souls continued to feed the vengeful spirit that would never let Kurohama be at peace. Eventually, the last survivors who still lived near the village disappeared without a trace, and Kurohama was completely consumed by darkness. But on some silent nights in the neighboring towns, travelers still report hearing the sound of 3 knocks in the distance, as if Asuka's spirit were once again searching for a new soul to take with her. The curse of Kurohama will never be broken, and the legend of Asuka will remain alive in the shadows, always waiting for the next unwitting soul to cross her path